I think the two countries, especially America under Donald Trump, talk about decoupling. I always said that it's kind of like trying to wish the moon will come out from the another side of the sun will come out at night instead of in the daytime. The two economies are so intertwined that I do not think the decoupling is even possible at the core. Now, there will be some strategic decoupling, which I think I'm always a supporter and good friends of a supporter of US-China relationship. But I do believe there are certain decoupling may be necessary and strategically advantage to each country. For example, China should not be so reliant on Western technology, on chips and things like that, because if America cut it off, it could be a big problem. Right? America should also not depend on other countries, including China, on some of the other strategic needs. So there are certain decoupling I think will take place. I think it's actually good for national interest for each country. But on the other hand, the core cooperation will never, we are far too integrated globally to think about pulling out. So that's point one. Point two, the reason why all of us around the world in the developed country, whatever that means, enjoy the best standard of living in human history. It's because of globalization. It would not have been possible without globalization. So therefore, this thing is not going to change. The question is, how do you find a balance to have a sensible and not a hostile decoupling of strategic needs and increase cooperation in where these kind of integration will help each other? And because think about this, American wages will never go down. So certain things will never be made in America, and regardless how the politician wish it. Okay? China is going the same way. So China has no choice but to integrate with the neighboring countries because a lot of manufacturing go to Vietnam, Cambodia, right? And they, in turn, their economy will rise. Everybody benefits. So I think US-China relationship and the trade and the globalization will continue. But with globalization, it brings a lot of complications. For example, regional supremacy. United States always treated or view Pacific Ocean as its backyard. Well, China doesn't think so. In the past, China kind of did not really raise too much objection, but now China is in a position to offer a different opinion. That caused a lot of concern in America. And a lot of this also has to do with historically how America viewed China, historically how many American policy, I would say decision makers at high places learn about China. There's a very interesting writer that I always recommend to my Chinese friends called Sterling Seagrave. He wrote a couple books. One is called the Song Dynasty. The other one is called Yamato Dynasty. And long and short of that is he made a hypothesis, which I thought was very interesting. Why is the Marshall Plan so successful in Europe? Why American policy, foreign policy in Asia has not been as successful? The reason is most top American foreign policy decision makers are of European descent. They understand Europe. They know how to implement it. They know how to integrate into that culture to affect American policy. But he also, hypothesized that most of the same people learn about China through colonial lenses. So they still look at China through the colonial era and learn about China. So by the time they realize it's wrong, they already drank the Kool-Aid. They cannot go back and repudiate. So his point is, until you have top position of Asia, policy in American State Department and the like, and CIA and so on, who are ethnic Chinese who really came from there, understand the Chinese culture, like European, like Henry Kissinger, foreign policy in Asia is not going to be as robust or successful. And as a result, that lead to other conflicts, and globalization has complications. I truly believe that the two countries has a lot of areas in common. And as a matter of fact, they are working together despite all the negative news you read about on a lot of things that are underreported. First, I would say that the two countries, because of globalization, the economies are so integrated that decoupling, despite what Donald Trump wanted to do, it's just a pipe dream. It's not possible. Okay, so number one. Number two is I am a big supporter of U.S.-China relationship. I'm a big supporter of a prosperous China and a strong United States and a prosperous United States. Despite that, I do believe certain degree of strategic decoupling by each country is good for its own national interests. For example, China really should not be so dependent on US on some of these chip technology. For example, United States should really be so dependent on foreign countries on some of the more strategic medical needs, requirements, supplies, right? Those are simple examples. But on common area that we can work together without national interest conflict, counterterrorism being one, right? Disaster relief being another one. And then environmental, you talk about climate change, that's another, and I can go on. So there are a lot of things that we can work together, and there's a lot of academic research that are not reported that is still going on despite all the negative news about FBI investigation and things like that. Yes, there are a lot of things that should not have happened, but a lot of things that could have been done better. But fundamentally, I think the peoples on both sides want cooperation. The peoples on both sides want progress jointly. No, I don't believe any politician can stop that on either side. I think it was headed to the same place as always been. Let me elaborate. U.S.-China relationship has, it's, if you think of it, it's like a stand on a beach looking at the ocean, okay? It ebbs and flows. The water is always there. Sometimes the tide come in, sometimes the tide retreats. If you look at since 1949, all right, U.S.-China relationship is not too bad, actually, despite what everybody thinks. There's no military hot kinetic conflict going on like during Korean War, the US soldier and Chinese soldier killing each other by thousands, okay? Currently, there's no US naval blockade of China like during the 50s. And currently, there's no Senator McCarthy, despite, Mark Rubio and all those people in the Senate hammering against China, there's no Senator McCarthy with his House and American Committee going through the whole country looking for Chinese communists and putting people in jail. If you look at the overall country, there's no Chinese Exclusion Act. There's no targeted against Chinese immigration laws. So if you think about that, and then we are not where the Chinese embassy in Belgrade got bombed. We are not when the Hainan airline, airplane collided. So if you think about the bigger picture, and if you put it in context, U.S.-China policy right now looks pretty dismal, but overall, it is just ebb and flow. And I believe things will get better because it cannot continue like this. It's not to each country. I always said, I always quote Lord Palmerston in England, Prime Minister Palmerston. He famously said 100 years ago, relationship between two countries, there are no permanent friends, no permanent enemies, only permanent national interests. So where there is national interest between the two countries, we are friends. When there are no national interest conflicts, we become enemies, we may even go to war. When there's no conflict and no cooperation, we call each other strategic competitors. So it all depends on which part, right? So that's why the Biden administration policy on China, I think, is very wise. It is a 3 C's: cooperation, confrontation, and competition. And that has always been American foreign policy towards China since 1949. Which element of the C is more dominant depending on the current situation? During Donald Trump, there's a big portion of it is confrontation. During Biden, at least so far, there is still an element of confrontation. It's not going to go away, but now it's more a bigger component of cooperation and competition. So I think going forward for the next 20, 30 years, U.S.-China relationship will always remain in this circle of 3 C's. Which C is more dominant? it's up to the communicators between the two countries. Recently, I made a speech talking about that. Is the messenger is as important as the message. So you got two issues. Do we have the right messenger, effective messengers on both sides, not just one side, right? The second question is, do we have the right messages? Both countries suffer the same problem. I made a big point and I clarify saying it's not criticizing China, but most of the Chinese messages are written by Chinese in China, in Chinese, then translated in English for the US, for the Chinese messengers in the United States, such as Chinese embassy, to convey to Americans. The cultural nuances often does not translate. So most Americans have no clue, even though they understand each English word. I jokingly always said, I pity the Chinese ambassador having to explain some of these really highfalutin Chinese ideologies, which is totally good. But the three represents four comprehensives. How do you translate and explain that properly to a oil rig worker in Texas, or a farmer in Kansas City, or a plumber in New York City? These are American citizens who vote, who affect their congressmen and senators. So that's, I think, a problem from China. The problem from America is they always felt, I call it the Queen Victoria illness, is, Queen Victoria, basically, when she ruled Britain, when it was the big empire, she basically took the view that anybody who's not a Christian is a devil and needs to be saved. So that's why she sent missionaries around the world to convert, right? America has the same problem. Anybody who doesn't subscribe to the American version of democracy, I emphasize the American version of democracy, there are many versions, is a problem. And if you go to around the world with that attitude, you're not going to win many friends. So I said, and many American messengers, US ambassadors and the like, also have what Sterling Seagrave called, they view China through colonial lenses. So if the messenger's lens is defective, if the message is biased, you're gonna have big problems.